Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leftology podcast. And today I'm going to go over the kind of some of the principles behind social democracy and democratic socialism with Sid and ChadNotChud or Delaniac here with me today. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sid, you want to go first, Chad? You go first, and I'll go second.
All right. Well, I'm ChadNotChud / Delaniac on Twitter. I think that's mostly the full introduction. Like, I don't have any notable credentials in this space. Other than the free marketplace idea, the free marketplace of ideas has deigned me with a large number of followers.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, hey, everybody, I'm Sid. I go by Lil Baby Gandhi on Twitter. I'm a classical social democrat, which means that I generally want people to lead the freest lives possible. And I think that this generally entails a freedom from the coercion of the market. And for this to exist, we have to be able to envision a system beyond capitalism. And that's kind of what I do. Beyond just posting on Twitter, I run the Nordic Model, which is probably most known for podcasts, where I interview like some really intelligent people and talk about things like the welfare state, cooperatives, or the history of social democracy. So if you want to get involved and know more about social democracy, I would really encourage you to give the interviews a listen. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Damn, I gotta practice my plug. That was well rehearsed.
Yeah, I was on Dr. Hume's one. I didn't have a good one, so I spent my time writing this over the past week.
See, you just got to start a podcast so that you have something to plug. Like,
yeah, I know.
Every man has to have a podcast. I think that should be a law.
Yeah,
like
two out of three people in this conversation have a podcast. Chad, that's all I'm saying.
I know. I'm slacking.
So I've listened to one or two of the episodes of the Nordic Model so far. So I kind of don't necessarily want to go into specifics because I want people to go to that YouTube channel description below, or in the description below, and watch those videos. I know you guys went over kind of welfare states and what's it? The social wealth funds. Yes. That.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to avoid that so that people go and watch those videos. So I kind of just want to more general level, just people getting into social democracy or democratic socialism in general. So like, I'm going to try and phrase this maybe in two ways. Just kind of like, what are the principles behind this movement, and kind of like leaving out this like utopian communist dream, like what is the practical, I guess the practical worldview that it's looking towards might be the best possible way I can phrase that question.
Sure. So I mean, I think this is something that Sid alluded to in his once again flawless intro.
Thank you.
Which is basically this idea of like freeing people from the coercion of the market. This is something that social democratic movements for forever have talked about, and the phrase used often, which isn't a great phrase, I don't think, is it's called like the decommodification of labor. That doesn't actually mean that labor isn't bought and sold on the market. Like, decommodifying labor used in this sense doesn't imply like an abolition of the labor market, but typically what it means is basically that you're removing people's reliance on the market. You're ending the individual coercion to enter the market, right? So the way that this works, in a perfectly decommodified state, you'd be getting paid the same amount whether you work or not, right? And so things like unemployment insurance, UBI to an extent, universal health care, these sorts of things reduce the dependency of people on the market, right? That if you need to leave the labor market for whatever reason at an individual level, then you can, right? Obviously at like a macro level, full employment is also a goal, so the goal is to get lots and lots of people working, but at the same time reduce the individual coercion to enter the market.
I think that's a very succinct breakdown. I think basically, yeah. So decommodification, while not perfectly stated, is a pretty good term. We want to remove the ability of the owners of capital who basically threaten workers with starvation if they don't sell their labor. We want to remove that by having a very large, universal, and stable welfare state to remove people's like kind of coercive way of entering the market. But also beyond this, we want to kind of reduce their like dependence on the family unit, maybe. So we want basically people to be as free as possible. And I think on one hand, that's also, it runs in hand with political democracy. We want to be able to be active and willing participants in the political system, but also in the economic system. We want them to have the same level of democracy, whether it's entering the labor market or even within their firm. So I think that's generally the basic tenet of social democracy. Yeah.
So I guess kind of a follow-up, this might be, I guess, a little bit more philosophical / postmodern question. But I guess from how I view, like, I guess, neoliberal to further right, there kind of just seems to be this ideology of where the economy is kind of this force that humanity is supposed to serve. And while this isn't true, there's a lot of people that believe it. How do you think that we, as I guess leftists, need to kind of combat this ideology to serve that, or to show that the economy is supposed to be for human interest, not the other way around?
I think just one great point that I always bring up is that the economy does not serve basically half of the population in the country. Half of the population of a country at any time is either unemployed, they're either in old age, they're either children, or they're incapacitated because of some physical or mental disability. These are people that the market does not provide for. These are people that the economy does not provide for unless we channel the kind of capital that it generates into productive uses of humanity. So right off the bat, I think there's a problem with phrasing it as, the economy is going to just serve people, because it doesn't serve half the people in the country.
Just to tack onto that as well, I mean, there's this idea, there's this sort of like broader idea, and it's something like that Bernick has written about. This idea that there's sort of this like default distribution of wealth or income, and then to change that is to redistribute, when that's not accurate, right? All of these institutions, the state, the market, these things are human institutions. If not to serve like the well-being of humans, I don't know what they're for. And so there is no redistribution. There is, we change the institutions, and that creates a new distribution. But there's no default distribution of resources or goods. That's a choice that we make. So like in terms of how to combat the idea, I mean, there is this broader idea that like there's this kind of you even see this amongst some leftists who oppose like Pigouvian taxes on like cigarettes or alcohol or these sorts of things, where the idea is like, oh well, we can't do that because that's making these goods more expensive, and that harms people or whatever. But then surely, if you believe that, then you should want to subsidize these goods to zero, right? That would be the progressive way to subsidize things like cigarettes to zero. Like why are you relying? Why do you think that the market price happens to be the default one? And so this sort of idea that there's some sort of inscribed to us by nature institutions, I think affects people all across the political spectrum, and the answer is just these are institutions that we create. What else can they serve other than or what else should they serve other than the happiness and well-being of humans?
And I mean, just to be clear, on my side, like, I'm not against markets. You can be for markets and against capitalism. Mm-hmm. We're against the particular way that the market is organized right now, where there's a very stilted ownership of capital goods and non-produced assets in the hands of a very, very select portion of our population, and the rest of us has to submit our labor power under threat of death. We're against this kind of unequal tilting of the market. We're not necessarily against, at least I'm not, I can't speak for Chad, but I think we're generally pro-market, anti-capitalist, if that makes sense. And that's gonna catch a lot of flack from people on the left as well, but that's generally what I believe. Yeah.
So it's kind of the problem's the boss, not the firm kind of sentiment.
Yeah, in general, right? The problem is that there's this huge portion of national income, namely capitalist share, that is accrued to this tiny portion of people, right? And along with that income, it's not just the income, right? This wouldn't be solved just by taxing with the income. It also means that decisions are made by a very small. Economic decisions are made by a very small group of people. So the problem isn't necessarily a market per se.
Yeah. So kind of the goal over here, I guess, in general, what I'm getting is kind of deep commodification between, I guess, your two views of leftism. And there's many, even if that's probably not a great term to use, as Chad pointed out, there's many different ways to do that, as you've stated. I remember about, how long has it been? Maybe about 8 or so months ago, I read this book. I think it's called Automation and the Future of Work. I want to say the author's name is Aaron Benenev, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But the fourth chapter of that book, out of 5 chapters total, it's a pretty good read. I kind of suggest it. But it's on UBI, and I was kind of just thrown back at just how large on the political spectrum UBI is kind of a popular ideal in its different forms, especially on the kind of confused on the right, because like what I'm used to in right-wing politics is kind of the American right wing of this like libertarian small government except on like social issues kind of play. And it kind of is that. So the furthest left I could find in that chapter was like replacement of full income. I'm not sure if either of you are like pro that or not. Kind of the goal is like full decommodification of where like the government provides you your yearly income and you decide to work or not. I don't know if that's feasible under any economy, but the one on the right kind of, it did and didn't surprise me at the same time. So it would be, it was, I forget who proposed it, but it's like some like right-wing, like libertarian guy, like religious. And the goal here was $1,000 a month, which is equal to, I guess, a normal welfare payment under the American government. So it served two goals. It was like a semi-decommodification in that it was supposed to free the worker up enough to go back to church and go back into family life, and also get rid of the welfare state completely. I guess my extension of that is UBI is becoming more popular among the political spectrum with people like Andrew Yang. For a leftist UBI that's supposed to support this decommodification of labor, how do we avoid these more reactionary types of UBI?
Do you want to start, Sid, or do you want me to?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there's a couple of points I think to respond to there. So one thing is, yeah, so generally the right-wing support for UBI is as a way to get rid of the welfare state. And to be clear, there are things that in the welfare state that UBI absolutely should not replace, right? So these would be things like unemployment insurance. Serves a very different purpose. We can get into why if you want, but unemployment insurance, disability insurance, old age pensions, all of these things serve fundamentally different purposes than does UBI. However, there are welfare programs like in the United States context that absolutely should be replaced by just universal cash benefits, right? So these are things like TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, food stamps. These sorts of programs, which are these horribly means-tested assistance programs, it would be made much simpler and much more generous by simply replacing with cash. We can talk about why that is as well. I mean, so in terms of like your direct question, which is how do we avoid these reactionary tendencies with UBI or these sorts of things? I mean, the answer is we need to have a very clear vision, I think, of what welfare programs ought to be cut. Ought to be replaced by UBI, and what welfare programs shouldn't be, and have clear justifications as to why, right? And not accept unemployment insurance being cut, for example.
Yeah, I basically agree with Chad. Some of these programs, we know cash is fungible. So things like SNAP, where you have your eBay card and you change that for that, cash can just be like a medium for that. Those things can be easily replaced. But yeah, I do have a problem that with people that see UBI as this kind of quick fix to gutting down the welfare state and the power of government, because we do know that like welfare policy actively helps shape labor markets in the way that we want. So for an example, like back in Sweden in the 1970s, we saw like the highest rates of female participation in the labor market. This was specifically because the welfare state shaped how the labor market works. So I'm very hesitant to see these conservatives, be pro UBI, because all they're using it for is to kind of reduce the power of the state and reduce the power of the welfare state. But we do know that the welfare state has, many incredible benefits. I don't want to see it gutted just for UBI, but there obviously are a lot of places, since cash is fungible, where we can replace some of the benefits that are being doled out with UBI.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of get away from the questions on the principles of social democracy. And I kind of want to go to the second question I have in chat. It just, since most of the podcast people, at least for the foreseeable future, are probably going to come from like a mix of Twitter, or mostly Twitter politics. And third way social democracy is fairly popular on there. Kind of, what is the difference between classical and third way? And are there any reasons that you as more classical social democrats or democratic socialists don't want that getting mixed up?
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
just right, so this is right off the bat is I talked with Tristam about this about a month back, and so basically we can narrow down social democracy to like four main epochs. So originally in the 1900s, social democracy was like a really like big tent movement. So we had like hardcore revolutionary Marxists, we had anarchists, we had just classical social democrats. We all had them in the same party, and they were kind of working towards the same goals. And then we have the second epoch, which is like the post-war social democracy. This is where we actually controlled some power in government, and we were able to put together a lot of changes in the political and economic system. And third way is like basically it's the third epoch of social democracy. This arose in like the late 1970s as a reaction to neoliberalism. It was this kind of reaction to losing political power by social democrats. So there were kind of two main. There was a diversion basically in the 1970s of where social democrats could go. We could have gone the socialism route, which was what people like Rudolf Meidner proposed. This is where we tried to kind of socialize more and more of the economy, put it more under state power, because he believed that as long as the power of capital retains ownership of capital goods and non-produced assets, it will always have a gun to the head of the working class. Third way social democracy, it said something else. It said, we've resolved these kind of contradictions in capitalism. We'll just have like a sprawling welfare state, and capitalism and social democracy can go together, and we can just keep going, as just go in the course. It doesn't work, because what we see is like a weakening of labor power. We see like labor densities decreasing in Sweden, which was one of the most social democratic states, at a very alarming rate. We see that. What was I going to say? But yeah, we see that like the loss of labor power. We see the dismantling of the welfare state, and this is all brought together by what third way social democracy proposed. And I see it as like an affront to social democracy, because they want to have their cake and eat it too, right? They want to take credit for what labor unions, what the workers did, the kind of like consumer and worker co-ops they put together, the welfare state that they put together, and they want to take credit for it. But what they're really responsible for is the dismantling of the welfare state. They're responsible for the kind of death knell of social democracy that we've been seeing for the past 20 years. I'm glad that we're seeing a resurgence now. But so third way social democracy is not the way to go. We tried it and it's not worked out. I think it's time to go back to where we were at that divergence in the 1970s. I think it's time to go to a more reformist socialist route. But that's my spiel on it.
I think that was an excellent answer. And just to tack on slightly to explain maybe to people who are watching, who are there's sort of a dumb like debate around this, where like on Twitter it's like, is social democracy socialist or is it capitalist? The answer is the answer is there are people now who call themselves social democrats who are capitalists. Social democracy historically has been a socialist movement, and the difference, by the way, some people who are listening who were like, I thought a social democrat was when you're capitalist and democratic socialist when you're a socialist. The answer is basically classical social democracy is democratic socialism. These are the same thing. The difference in these terms is literally a product of like translations from German or French. So these terms are all kind of the same. I think the debates over the label are a little silly. The only like one kind of thing that does irk me about some of this is like when people say like, oh, social democracy is capitalist, what it sort of ends up feeling like is like anytime socialists get into power and do good things, right until like the last lemonade stand is nationalized, it's capitalism, and that's capitalism doing good. And then when socialists do bad things when they're in power, then it's the socialists' fault. So that does irk me about this kind of debate. It feels a little bit like erasing that history. But in general, I don't really care about the label. I'll call myself whatever. I want the things that I want, and whatever label best applies to us.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I get really annoyed when people, you want to take credit for all the good things that labor power, sectoral unions, that all the things that socialists work towards, but you want to kind of shield it under this capitalism label and say, oh, they can work unimpeded, but it's empirically not true. All we see is like a dismantling of labor power. Union density in Sweden is at its lowest point. We see like just a constant erosion of the welfare state. That's the legacy of third way social democracy. We should be owning up to. I had a great episode with David Sliger, who's a welfare economist in Australia, and he talked about how in Australia they set up a very good welfare state at the start, but it's just been constantly eroded by years and years of middling kind of social democracy and kind of conservatism. So they don't create anything long lasting. but they want to take credit for all the successes of the socialist movement. I find that really irksome. I agree with Chad on that.
Oh, that provides a good, I guess, segue to the next sub question I have. Is I guess Sweden and Australia are probably the best examples, but you see kind of like not Sweden and Australia, Denmark and Australia are the best examples. Sweden's like maybe like a third or fourth good example, but you kind of see labor become more reactionary in these states over time, especially over the last maybe like 10, 20 years or so. That is kind of a threat to a lot of these social democratic programs that have been put in place since like the 40s or 50s. For me personally, I think it's probably a good sign of why American socialist program might be a little bit more long lasting. But I guess, how do, in more countries that haven't had the, I guess, racial background that America has and the racial progressiveness that has kind of resulted in maybe like a third of the population of this country, avoid this like reactionary turn once the world becomes more globalized, people receive refugees like in Denmark, where they, I think, banned the incoming of refugees. I'm not sure to what extent, but how do we, once you get these social democratic policies in place, how do we avoid, I guess, a more reactionary turn like in Britain or Denmark or Australia?
Don't take this, Sid.
You go ahead.
I mean, so I'm not like an expert on the countries that you mentioned, the politics within those countries. I mean, speaking from an American context, I mean, I think we kind of have the same problem, where this sort of like a lot of like this culture war stuff, is used to divide people, and this ultimately, is inhibiting people. It's causing a whole bunch of like conservative Republicans to end up voting against their own, material interests, right? And I think the solution, at least, the solution that I see, is I kind of agree with the whole like David Shore popularist stuff mostly, which is basically, campaign on popular things and do the things that you need to do that are unpopular once you're elected, right? So play up more of the sort of like, play up more of the class politics stuff in rhetoric, right? And that doesn't mean giving up on things like racial equity, certainly. But it means, de-emphasizing, for example, police issues in rhetoric, right? And then, get DSA people, get leftists and stuff into, city councils, state and local government, and that will come, right? Those sorts of things come by getting these people into power. In order to get these people into power, emphasize certain parts of the rhetoric and de-emphasize other stuff, I think. I think Sid's frozen.
Yeah, we'll give him a minute.
Yeah, I think I'm basically on the same. Oh, am I frozen?
Yeah, you were frozen
back
for
now.
a second.
Oh, am I back? Am I back?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, sorry, that's weird. Yeah, no, I basically agree with Chad. I think, use the political power that you have to do popular stuff. And we're on the right side of popular stuff. People do like the kind of policies that more left of center and social democrats kind of push. Do that and keep winning elections, and then we can push policy that may be unpopular, and we can just keep doing the popular things right alongside with it. I think that's the only way out.
Yep. I remember back in like early 2020, late 2019, a bunch of people, I guess, on the Bernie side of the left were complimenting him, even though he supported these, I guess, social reforms in America. That like most of his campaign focused a lot more on economic issues than anything else. And I guess extending Chad's point is that kind of allowed the way for a lot more Trump supporters to kind of find their way to the left, especially the older generations that were facing these healthcare problems. And I think you'd see it about like once every few weeks on like Bernie's like Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, or wherever you saw of like him interacting with people in the crowd that like wouldn't survive in like the healthcare market we have, or aren't surviving in the healthcare market we have, and they just like be very emotional. And these are a lot of the people in some of these videos were, I guess, fairly reactionary Trump supporters type people. But I think I would agree with Chad on this as well, which I'm not going on a podcast representing democratic socialism. I am the podcast. But I think it is in the interest of the left to focus on left economic issues, because a lot of the people understand, even if they are more reactionary on social issues, which we also don't kind of want that in the long term, that they need stuff like Medicare for all in the long run.
Yeah, but I think it's also just, sort of, it's raising the salience of, it's all, in addition to like, doing popular stuff and campaigning on popular stuff, and then, if you have to, doing the unpopular stuff once you're elected. In addition to that, I mean, there's also an element of raising the salience of the programs the government does, like the welfare programs the government has, and decreasing the salience of the taxes as much as possible, right? So what that means is, in terms of on the welfare side of things, that means, having simple programs that are easy for people to get on, that people directly benefit from, right? I think like if you like think of those TikToks, I don't know if you saw like that TikTok trend that came out after the CTC checks out went out the first time, and there's all these people like like dancing on TikTok because they just got like, even sometimes unexpectedly, a couple $100 in their in their bank account, right? That is a program with with highly salient benefits, right? Universal cash programs are highly salient, and enact these programs and then take credit for them. And then on the tax side, right, it means things like, it means, where you can, trying for low salience taxes, right? We need broad-based taxation, but there are kinds of taxes that people care about more because you see the bill more directly, right? So like a VAT, for example, tends to be pretty low salience because oftentimes you don't directly see what tax you're paying, right? The tax is sort of added up through the production process. Compare this to property taxes, where you have to cut the government a big check twice a year, right? That's a very high salience tax. There's lots of pressure to lower it, and people directly see when they lower it that like this check that I'm writing this year is lower. So yeah, I think that's like that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, I remember Matt Brunig talking about the checks like maybe like 8 or so months after they came out for the first time, and I remember him using it kind of like the doors open and it can't be closed again kind of, I guess, way. And that beforehand, like people had this like small government, the government needs the least amount of tax me the least amount as possible and spend the least amount as possible as well. And Matt Brunig was talking about how like the doors open, people got their government checks and they're like, oh my God, I actually love this. This is actually really helpful for me. And I'm not sure if it will be, but he was talking about it as kind of this curse to more Republicans and moderate Democrats, and that people like these progressive policies. They like getting their money from the government now. They can see that it's actually really beneficial for a lot of people to get their money from the government. Do you think
it's literally like when Republicans say like the Democrats just want you to get hooked on welfare? It's like unironically, yes, actually, I want people to like get welfare from the government and realize that that's good. And
yeah, I want welfare to be like the spice melange. You can't live without it, but it'll make you live twice as long.
No, and these programs are like incredibly popular, and they're also like very effective. Like the child tax credit pulled 50% of children who are in poverty outside of poverty. Social Security, for example, pulls 38%. I think it's 38% of elders who would be in poverty without it out of poverty.
Wow.
These are like successful programs that work for people. Campaign on those. And just to clarify what Chad was saying about broad-based taxation, when we create these, low salience taxation programs, but high salience in terms of the benefits that you receive, you create a system where you increase the size of the redistributive budget. You make it easier to tax people in the long term because people can see the effects of good welfare. They can see if the government's cutting them a check to help pay, for their kids' education, for their kids' needs, whatever, for helping them pay for whatever needs that they have in retirement as old people. They can see this, and they're more willing to pay higher taxes. So when we put in place these successful welfare programs, we set the stage to creating even more successful welfare programs. We need to keep doing this kind of stuff just forever.
Right. There's a typical argument for means testing, which is that for any if budget constraint, right, is exogenous, and we just have to figure out, we have some X amount of dollars, we need to figure out how to distribute these. Well, clearly, hyper means testing is going to do the most amount of money with, relative to that fixed budget constraint. But the thing is, that budget constraint isn't exogenous, right? It's endogenous. Having these universal welfare programs increases your ability and increases the willingness for higher taxation to fund more welfare programs, right? All this to say, universal cash-based program, or universal cash welfare programs are good, and we should do more.
Yeah, and there's a paper on this. I think it's Corpy and Palm. It came out in 1998. It talks about specifically this. I would encourage anybody listening to check that out.
Okay, I kind of want to move on to, I guess, final subject. This is where Twitch politics enters. I know today, which I mean, the podcast won't come out for another 3 or 4 days, but you got to dunk on Haas. But I guess I first want to talk about like this wave of patriotic socialism, because personally, my long-term dream is a one-world government, not an Illuminati type, but this borders are fucking stupid. Why the hell do we have them? Let's get away with them kind of shit. So how do we kind of, I think my personal view, because I haven't watched Peter Coffin in like 2 years. I never watched Infrared. And then I was kind of forced to learn who Jackson Hinkle was by Twitter. So my understanding of it is that they're trying to, I guess, appeal to like the broader working class in one way or another by like kind of dropping their principles. And I know Infrared specifically and Jackson Hinkle, I guess both of them, they've tweeted about it recently, of just this kind of like the working class is just such a specific thing, which I, to a degree, I agree with them in a different intent way. But I guess turning on what we need to change from the right wing to problems in the left wing. How do we combat patriotic socialism? Because I don't like it.
Well, I personally cannot think of any historical time where combining nationalism and socialism has ever turned out poorly. So, really, maybe we just don't have to worry about it at all. I don't know.
You're telling me National Socialism is not a good thing? I've heard of this.
I don't know,
wait! I thought
mean,
some of the National Socialistic stuff was a Stockton theory. Mein Kampf is Stockton theory, right?
Oh yeah, dang,
that's the meme.
I was gonna do the meme, but I don't want to buy Mein Kampf, nor do I want to get it from my library. So
it might be a little bit sus. Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a kernel, in this sort of like popularist angle, right? There's a kernel of truth, a kernel of something I think maybe good, at least in the high level idea of this like patriotic socialism thing, which is, I don't necessarily think that like politicians saying that like America is bad, but that's like going to win you very many elections, right? So there's some sense in which people do have a sense of pride, and I don't think that necessarily we should like encourage that. I'm not especially patriotic, but if it's unpopular to like say America bad, and that's going to prevent you from getting elected, then don't say America bad. However, this like weird red brown reactionary stuff that comes from these people, I mean, what do we do about it? I think honestly, I think especially Infrared and Jason Hinkle or Jackson Hinkle, whatever his name is. I think these people are like mainly grifters. I did engage with Haas a little bit today on Twitter, and I usually my rule is not to. But I think honestly, I think it's just ignore these people. Like, if we start seeing these kinds of people getting like politicians elected, which I don't think is especially likely, then or there starts to be like kind of like unite the right style rallies with these people, with this like weird red brown faction, then maybe there's something to worry about. I think mainly it's like don't give them air, and I made the mistake of doing that today, so I'm not living up to my own advice. But
I have a question. So these guys are patriot socialists, right?
Yes.
And aren't they huge like China fanboys too? Like is that them?
I have no idea. I know for the thumbnail, I'm probably gonna put Peter Coffin and like his I'm not sure if it's best to put you guys or Peter Coffin in his like America like a tight swimsuit as the better thing. Because one's funny and then one's
just plaster
active.
my face on Peter Coffin's body.
Okay, I'll do that.
That's
Send me a good like a selfie or like portrait photo, and I'll make sure to cut it like perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, sorry, cut you off. What were you saying?
Well, I was gonna add to the point of like appealing to the I guess the broad like more patriotic working class. I think as leftists, in order to like avoid like class reductionism and do what the like Stalin did in the 30s kind of shit, I think if we want to appeal to them and be kind of sort of patriotic, I don't think we need to like appeal to like this like racist past, like this America's like the best country in the world kind of thing, but rather what America can be, I think might be the best way to put it. Like America has problems. America's kind of, it's not the best country right now. We've really fallen behind, but the good days aren't behind us. They don't have to be behind us kind of message. That if we all pull together, the good days can be in front of us. Tomorrow could be the day of sunshine for America. Yeah, that kind of messaging.
In some sense, you know, as flawed as like the founding fathers were, you know, you can definitely frame it as, you know, we are wanting to fulfill the promises that they made and they did not themselves keep, right? You know, these things like life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all men are created equal, right? These sorts of things that they didn't, that, you know, they didn't do, they didn't live up to, but, you know, we can, or we can try to. And you know, pulling you know, figures like, you know, Martin Luther King and, you know, these kinds of, you know, American figures who stood for the kinds of things that we believe in. But yeah, I don't know that I have like a super, as far as like these kind of like clowns on Twitter, especially Peter Coffin. I don't even know. I've never really watched him, and then I sometimes see him on Twitter.
Do you know his talent?
His what?
Peter Coffin, I think he went on a talent show once on television.
I have not seen this. I have not seen this.
I'll send you guys the video link, but I think he can kick himself in the balls. I think that's his talent.
Well, that's how I feel every time I read his tweets. So
yeah, I mean, when I was a baby leftist, Peter Coffin was one of the first people I watched, which I only watched maybe like of like 10 videos possibly.
Oh my God! No, that's actually just YouTube video. Yeah,
he was on the Steve Harvey show as well.
that's incredible.
It's an amazing. Okay, anybody that wants to see this video is in the description below. Like it's like the second thing you can see on there.
Oh my God!
It's a funny video, but I guess kind of a bridge of another kind of I guess left that we want to get rid of. Not necessarily get rid of, but or purge, but kind of like change. I think it's socialist MMA. I'm not completely sure on the tag, but kind of this general strike of podcasters kind of deal. I'm not exactly sure what's on with that, or if you guys have any knowledge on that.
I mean, I think broadly these. Sid, do you wanna go?
I have no idea. I don't know what any of this is. You take a lead.
Yeah, I'm like vaguely familiar with some of this. I know there was that quite funny moment when they got, you know, and to their credit, right? They got somebody who was striking. I think it was from the UAW, who was part of the John Deere strike. And you know, they platformed that guy, which I think is great. And they talked with them. And one of the guys who was interviewing him asked, like, you know, are there any politicians that are like standing by you and helping you, or anything? Are any politicians standing with the workers? And it was very clear in his tone and facial expression that he expected the answer to be no. And the guy was like, yeah, no, actually, Bernie Sanders and AOC, you know, they've been like writing letters on our behalf, and they sent us pizza and like all this kind of stuff. And like the guy's face is like. That was quite funny. I think probably there's this faction on the left who, you know, the left in the United States in particular has been marginalized for so long that like
it doesn't want to believe that it has allies in government kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly. There's this comfort in not having power, right? There can be, especially if you don't have skin in the game, and like you're not being harmed that much, like you're making it.
Oh my God, like, the socialists have become Democrats.
Yeah. You know, there's this comfort in being marginalized, again, if you don't have skin in the game and aren't being actively harmed by that marginalization, because you don't have taking your responsibility, right? You don't have any power, so you all you have to do is just sit back and say, hey, the current situation sucks, and that's all you have to do, and that's your job. And so as the left is, has had this bit of a resurgence, especially in the last 5 years, I think you've seen this kind of group of people who do this, where they sort of just they just kind of heckle and and nothing's ever good enough, and actually anyone who gets in power is like by definition bad, and we instead need to so we do the really practical thing and hope there's a revolution in the next 10 years before climate change trips us.
That's I had a very interesting talk with Leo, and we were talking about cooperatives about a month back. And I see all of this as like such an affront to our lineage, right? Just to like where we come from is like some of the people that started, just right off the bat, people think, the political arena is the only thing that we can compete in, and this is the only thing we should focus on. But no, like markets are an arena where we as leftists can compete on, that we should do. And this is what our ancestors did. So when they started like some of the longest lasting consumer cooperatives in the 1900s, these were like illiterate dirt farmers that worked 12 hours a day, and they set up some of the most amazing consumer co-ops. They got together and they did it. And it's such a waste of time to spend all our time on these fucking pointless endeavors when we could be doing something as simple as, and Leo talked about this last, as simple as volunteering for your local credit union. You can go work somewhere where you can have a democratic way to allocate capital to people. You can do actually productive things, but instead we waste them on just like pointless things because we think the political arena is like the only one place we can compete. But that's not true. There's markets out there. You can start a cooperative by yourself. You can go volunteer at a cooperative. You can go volunteer at a credit union. There's so many better things to do with your time than get sucked in by these grifters, in my opinion.
Also join DSA.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did that back in April.
Realm, but also join DSA. Yeah.
I'm Canadian, so I can't give topical American political advice.
DSC or whatever you guys have.
Yeah, I'm just part of the NDP here. So
oh yeah, you guys
are Canadians join the
you guys actually party. Yeah,
we have a social democratic party. So any Canadians listening, volunteer for your local NDP. Start organizing right now because the next election is going to be in 3 years, and you want to be prepared.
Yeah, I don't have a DSA near me, but I send my $5 student amount every month. Eventually, I'll go to a meeting. But I'll try to put DSA links down below, and then other than John Deere, are there any strikes going on right now that I can put funds?
Yeah, there's a list of them. I can send them to you.
You can just send them to me after the episode, okay. Honestly. I just want to put those down below. A lot of strikes going on. If you have money, send it to strikers. They need it. They need to pay for food and water until they can get their demands met. Solidarity forever. Yeah. I guess I don't really have any more questions unless you guys have questions for me.
Not really.
Oh wait, no, I do have one more. Try to keep it short so that Chad can go. I forgot it while I was saying the last thing. But I guess this is a little bit more philosophical. You see it on Twitter every once in a while, people doing the Fisher thing of you can't think of any alternatives. Going back to our last subject of these people always being in this mode of like trying to critique the current system and actually not doing anything because of it. Do you think that these people are kind of, even though they call themselves Marxist-Leninist or whatever, they're so kind of embedded with this capitalist ideology of no alternative that they just think they can perpetually stay this way of being the critiquer, the outsider kind of deal?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, there's this sort of, or even that the only but I get the sense from a lot of these sort of like MLs, and I don't want to, one problem I have with kind of like talking about MLs is that they're not real, right? Like this is like a tiny group. I mean, they're real outside the United States, but in the United States, right? This isn't a real group. Like I feel a little bit strange, like treating these people as if they're like worthy of anything, because they're not. They don't exist. They're a relatively small group of people who are very loud on Twitter. But one thing I've noticed amongst such people is that like the only thing they can think of is like their only conception of even socialism is things that have already been done, right? Okay, what the USSR fell. What do we learn from it, right? Like what have you learned from the fact that the USSR fell? I learned you can't out pizza the Hut. That's 200 years old. What?
I learned you can't
Yeah.
out Pizza the Hut.
Yeah, true.
yeah. Thank you, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yeah, that's the problem I have is like I'll see like ML reading list and they're like this Karl Marx, which Marx is important, but like in 200 years, like you can't take all of his advice to heart. Like Stalin, like a dictator who like we can't kind of ignore kill a few 10 million people. And then Mao, who also killed a few 10 million people in famine. And then there's like they just kind of ignore this like broad base of leftist theory. It's just like the Frankfurt School kind of like there's a whole school of thought that addresses why the revolution hasn't happened yet. I think you should probably look at it for a little bit.
Just anything that's written after, like anything written after 1980. Just like one book written after 1980. That's all I want from these people.
At some level they have this like a similar kind of like insidious rotten ideology that capitalists have, where they're like unable to imagine like any system outside of the one that's like already been ingrained in them. And I tweeted about this like 2 weeks ago. But it's the same thing for MLs too. Like if you're incapable of like envisioning those already dead system, there's no like real ML society anymore. They've joined the global marketplace. It does not exist. I'm sorry. But if you're like completely incapable of imagining something better, like how different are you from the capitalists and neoliberals that exist right now? I simply don't get it. Yeah. I mean, a better world is possible, but we have to keep moving on. There's no going back.
Yeah, for Chad's point, like there's Verso and Haymarket, I think, are the two biggest like current leftist booksellers. Like if you want to go on these stores, like Verso has like a permanent deal for some, like every book they have on their website is like 20% off at practically every time. And for the next month, like everything's 40% off. Like people don't necessarily have an excuse to only be reading these classical leftist theorists. Like these are not expensive books. Like this is like $15. Like of course I got State and Evolution today for like $1, but like I think you have $15. Just like most people have like $15 every once in a while to spend on a book. I think if they want to read this newer theory, these new economic theories, these new socio-political theories, like they're there and they're organized for you and they're 40% off for the next month.
And you can also get a lot of stuff on like Library Genesis and
well, yeah, like it's also free online if you don't. I just like reading in person, you know.
Just a quick shell, just as a, books that at least describe a possible future or describe, I think these kinds of things, sort of like constructive visions, are important. One I don't particularly agree with, but at least does it, is Pericon by Michael Albert. I don't really buy it. I think it has a lot of problems, but at least it's constructive vision. A Future for Socialism by John Romer is one. After Capitalism by David Schweikert is one. That's by far the one that I recommend the most. There's also, again, I don't like this one. I don't think it's a particularly good vision, but at least it's a constructive one. Would be Towards a New Socialism by Cockshott and Cottrell. That's like planning, and Big Computer. And I don't think it's a particularly good way forward. But at least it's a way forward, right?
Aren't you going to do the complimentary pitch for Capitalist Power now? I thought this is the moment where you do it.
Yeah. I think
we can just go ahead and enter into plugs. Plug out whatever you want.
I mean, I read Three Worlds of Welfare Capitalism. That'll get you an introduction to social democracy at least. That's on my side. Do that one.
Yeah, I would have definitely. That's the Social Democrats' little red book. Three Worlds of Welfare Capitalism. Highly recommend reading. As far as plugs, follow me. Obviously on Twitter, although it would surprise me if like there are that many people who are watching this who don't follow me.
Like I have like 360 followers on Twitter. Like I'm getting there, but most people follow you too.
Yeah. And subscribe to the Nordic Model also, because it's great.
First link in the description below. Nordic Model.
Subscribe to the Nordic Model. 100% agreed. We interview some really cool people, and we're hoping to have some really cool guests on. Also, read, Matt Brunig, read Three Worlds of Welfare Capitalism. And also, one thing I really want to recommend to every leftist out there is, to the best of your abilities, like please try to understand how financial markets work, how current capital markets work. Because when we talk about socialization, we're not in the paradigm of the 1940s anymore. We're in a new era. It's important for you to understand how we can go about kind of socializing finance, because that's one of the most important things that we can do right now. And I know I don't want to hammer this home, but I had a really excellent podcast with Chad on this about social wealth funds. And I would recommend that you go listen to it. He gave a great breakdown on it. And to go beyond that, I'd say, read up a little bit on financial markets, because there's an actual entrance that we have as leftists to control some lever of financial power. So do your best to get read up on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming on. It's been an amazing discussion. I'd love to have you guys on again. Let's talk about anything. But this has been Leftology. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'll be back in an undesignated amount of time to record a new episode.